Syrian armed opposition group says it will not discuss anything with President Assad except the way he should depart the country. A member of the group in Istanbul had this to say.
This regime is over. The Assad family will be erased from Syria's history. They should find a safe refuge for themselves. We, the National Council, only negotiate one thing with Assad, which is the manner of his departure from Syria. And that's it.
Well, foreign-backed armed gangs have time and again rejected the idea of putting down arms. They also oppose the idea of a peace plan proposed by UN Arab League Kofi Annan. Syria has been struggling with unrest for over a year now. The government blames the bloodshed on armed gangs, and the opposition accuses Damascus for the situation. Meanwhile, UN Arab League envoy Kofi Annan arrives in the Iranian capital in search for a solution for the deadly unrest in Syria.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be back in Tehran again, and I'm here to discuss the situation in Syria. As you know, we had an action group meeting in Geneva at the end of last month, and I'm here also to discuss the outcome of those deliberations and to see how we can work together to help settle the situation in Syria. Thank you.
Well, Annan was welcomed by Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister for Arab and African Affairs, Hossein Amir Abdullahian. He's due to hold talks with Iranian officials. Annan has on many occasions emphasized that Tehran can play a positive role in resolving the Syrian unrest. Earlier, he met the Syrian president in Damascus. He described his talks with President Bashar al-Assad as constructive.
The UN Arab League Special Envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan, met with President Bashar al-Assad in Damascus and discussed with him ways of resolving the Syrian unrest. The two sides also reviewed new mechanisms for implementing Annan's six-point peace plan. They underlined the necessity of creating a suitable atmosphere for holding national dialogue between the Syrians themselves. President al-Assad reiterated his country's commitment to the plan, pointing out that its success requires that some states end their support to armed groups. Analysts say the plan would never succeed without the commitment of all involved powers in the West and Middle East to the success of the plan.
Annan is trying to revive his six-point plan. If countries arming and financing armed groups in Syria are not pressured to stop such support, the plan would definitely fail.
Following his meeting with the Syrian president, Annan made a briefing at a hotel where the United Nations Supervision Mission in Syria personnel are also staying. He said he will discuss the Syrian issue with the armed opposition.
The approach we've discussed about ending the violence would also be shared with the armed opposition. And we have a team here on the ground that will continue to do that.
This is Annan's third visit to Syria since March. The visit came after President al-Assad stressed during an interview with the German ARD channel that he still had the overall support of Syria's people. He also said he would fight those his government perceives as terrorists. Meanwhile, clashes continue in Syrian cities as Syrian forces are reportedly killing and capturing tens of armed men and foiling infiltration attempts through Syria's borders with Lebanon and Turkey. Both the Syrian government and Kofi Annan stressed the importance of ending violence and starting a political dialogue. Annan said he would continue his efforts and talks with various involved parties to achieve this goal. Hamad Ali, PressTV, Damascus.
Well, joining us now on the line from New York is journalist and anti-war activist Don DeBar. Many thanks for joining us here on PressTV. Now, the SNC clearly puts it that it's pursuing only regime change in Syria. It's no wonder that Kofi Annan's peace plan has not made much progress now, is it?
That's correct. Well, it makes sense, though. The purpose of the armed insurgency is regime change. This is the U.S.-backed military force. It's not protesters who have been crushed by the government and are now trying to conduct an armed uprising. They have military hardware, and it began as an armed attack on the population of Syria and on the military, basically on government officials. And so it makes perfect sense that they would refuse to sit down and negotiate. Their task is regime change.
Right now, does the armed opposition in Syria, though, have any incentive to put the arms down and come to the negotiating table without preconditions? Because their suppliers and backers have also expressed an unrelenting desire to see Assad gone.
Well, exactly. They're essentially a hired help who are pursuing the foreign policy objectives of the U.S. government, which is to remove Assad and the Syrian government and sovereignty in Syria from power. And so until that aim has been realized, or until there's a decisive setting aside of that by the rest of the international community, then they're going to continue to pursue that objective.
Kofi Annan was in Syria earlier to meet with President Assad, and he's now in Tehran in the hopes of finding a solution by engaging those that can play a positive role. But how far is this going to go, considering it takes two to negotiate?
Yes. I don't see how it can continue unless the arms supplies to the armed thugs, basically, that are conducting a terror campaign against the Syrian people, until that arms supply dries up. At the moment, Hillary Clinton is saying that they will do everything necessary to help them pursue the objective of removing Assad from power. Russia and China and some other parts of the international community, not a broad enough sector, unfortunately, but some are saying that the Syrian people are the ones that should decide what happens in Syria. We've had two measures of what the Syrian people want this year: the referendum on the Constitution, which passed with an 83% majority, with a turnout, even under conditions of active military terror campaign against the population. The turnout was better than the presidential election in the United States in 2008. And again, the parliamentary elections, where Assad's party won. And again, you had a turnout comparable to a U.S. presidential election. So there's no mystery about what the Syrian people want. They want the intervention to stop. They're backing the government, at least in the short term, as against this armed group. You know, perhaps that will change if there's no pressure and they're free to make their own choices. But at the moment, they're standing for sovereignty and for self-determination. And the United States stands on the other side from that, as does this armed group.
All right, we're going to have to wait and see how that unfolds. That was journalist and anti-war activist Don DeBar joining us on the line from New York. Many thanks, Mr. DeBar, for your comments here on Press TV.